Bum, 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 bum.
And that's the beginning, everybody. So, welcome back to Beer Time with Books. We have another holiday episode somehow. Somehow, this is how it keeps going down at Beer Time with Books. So instead of mic check today, because it's St. Patrick's Day, we got to have a green check today. We're gonna go around here and make sure everybody's got that. I do got a green shirt on right here, Jamie.
I do. I took it off because I got hot, but I have a green cardigan under my butt.
Nice. That'll work. Danny?
No. I'm an O for none.
O for
Nice.
Danny is an O for none.
I got no green. I don't know if I own green, honestly.
I normally don't do a lot for St. Patty's Day, but today we do have a little bit of a festive addition to the episodes. We're going to go around and talk about what we're drinking, introduce ourselves as well, because it has been a little bit. But my name is Brian, and I'm drinking a Guinness.
My name is Jamie, and I'm also drinking a Guinness in a special limited edition bottle, which is fun. It's got the little toucan on it.
My name's Danny. For the record, I didn't get the green memo.
The whole world
The
got
whole
the
world,
green memo,
yes.
Danny.
I didn't get the green memo for the pod. I'm drinking a Boulevard wheat.
Danny hates Ireland.
I love Ireland. Irish people are wonderful.
No Guinness, no green.
I
No
can
Guinness, no green.
drink a sip of Guinness.
Nice. That'll count. Oh, and I did want to pose this question. I asked this of Jamie when we were walking to have lunch today. Does a green accessory count? Like if you're holding something, is that good enough?
We saw somebody walking
They had a
with a
green-
green water
yeah.
bottle, but I don't think they were wearing any other green.
I think you just have to be holding it at all times. Like you're eating your tacos,
Fair.
you got to be holding your water bottle.
Yeah, you can't put
You
it
can't
down.
put it down.
Or the pinches are gonna come. So yeah, there you go. We're doing a St. Patrick's Day episode, and there's no more fitting book than a classic.
You guys both have a
Green.
green book. Oh,
That-
all
oh.
three of us have green books.
Oh, there you go. There's your
I'll
accessory.
just hold on to it the whole time. I'll be looking at the family tree the whole time anyway.
A classic Colombian author. Of course, we're gonna look at that on St. Patrick's Day. It's only fitting.
It's so fitting.
It's only fitting. But before we get into all of that, as is tradition, we're going to go around and talk about some of the other media we've been consuming or other interesting things that have been going on in our lives, just to get the conversation going.
Sorry. Hi. I have been watching Queer Eye with Brian. Brian and I have both been watching the new season of Queer Eye that came out on Friday. It's set in Kansas City, and we live in Kansas City.
It's so fun.
It's so fun to watch all the B-roll of Kansas City, and they go to the West Elm that's near my house, and
Stop.
so
Oh, it's so good.
fun. It's so fun. I did not see them at any point while they were here.
No. But we could have.
We could have.
It would have been so easy.
I saw too many people like that I peripherally know on Instagram post things like, "Oh, they're at Messenger Coffee. Here's a selfie," and I'm like, "Why didn't I get the memo about needing to be at Messenger this morning?"
Yeah, I know, it's upsetting. When
I like seeing it all, though. It's like,
Yeah.
it's so interesting because you see a lot of other, like even documentaries or any, nonfiction television, and you see like cool shots of a city, but you never think of what it'd be like to see your own. But it's just like so nicely shot that you're just like, they're making it look so good.
we love Kansas City.
I
Yeah.
love that.
It's fun.
But yeah, so I've cried a lot because Queer Eye makes me cry like immediately. That's where I'm at.
I'm waiting to watch Queer Eye with my partner who's long distance. We watch things together, but not very often, so it takes us a long time
And
to
it
get
did
through
just
stuff.
come out.
And it just came out, but I'll be with him next weekend, so we're gonna watch hopefully most of it. I've been watching a lot of the Great British Baking Show. I just watched the 5th and 6th seasons. and it just, like I told Jamie earlier, it makes all of my other food in my house seem really inadequate and sad.
Yeah.
And it makes me want to just go out and buy all the ingredients for like a delicious savory pie or something.
I was on the phone with my mom because they had watched it before we had, and I was just telling her, like, I wish that savory meat pies were more of a commonplace
Right?
thing here.
Yeah.
Because when I had studied abroad down in Australia, like, they just sell them in convenience stores, and they're amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even the convenience store versions and everything else that we had, like, it's such a good snack or meal, and it's not as common here. Like, you can definitely get it.
You
but,
can. I was
yeah.
thinking today, though, like, I mean, I have to, like, seek it out. I don't, sitting at home today, I was like, I don't think that I could think of a place where I could just go and get, like, a great meat pie.
Yeah.
Other than like
In
chicken
Olathe.
pot pie.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
only.
But it's still different.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
it's still
not the
different
same.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so all my food this weekend has felt inadequate. So I've been watching that. I also I'm almost finished with the 4-episode series called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. With
Yeah, I've been
Chef
seeing that, yeah.
Samin Nosrat. It's really great. I really like it. It's less kind of about cooking and more about just like the most important elements of cooking and recipes. And I like this last one especially because she talks a lot about things that you should get when you go to the grocery store, just like staples you should have, and kind of like how to shop even if you don't have a recipe in mind. Everything that all the elements you should include. So it's not like it's a recipe book of like very specific things you should always have on hand. But she has just such a bubbly personality, and she's a great chef, and she goes to all these different places. And I'm on the last episode, and I really enjoyed it. It's good.
And for me, as Jamie had mentioned, we've been watching Queer Eye, which has been really fun. Also, as far as video games are concerned, there's been a battle royale craze. Like Fortnite is the most famous one, but I've found one that's a battle royale. So for anybody that doesn't know, battle royale is like last one standing. There's usually like 100 or 60 players, and then you do whatever the competition is to go down to one. I found one that's Tetris. It's a Tetris battle royale. So for some reason, I have been playing a lot of Tetris.
There's been a lot of Tetris.
And the thing is, I used to play Tetris a ton when I was a kid because my mom. Yes, they do that. They have that, and it gets faster and faster. But
Oh, it's so good.
it's a lot of fun. But my mom, when we would go to Colorado every summer, would get us like things in the car, like, you know, a CD back in the day for the Walkman of like, hey, here's the Spider-Man soundtrack, like listen to that. One year she gave my sister Miss Pac-Man, like it's its own standalone handheld game, gave me Tetris.
Oh man.
And I played that forever. So did my dad, so we'd always try to one up each other. So like I'm decently good, but playing against other people like in a battle royale setting is just insane. Like,
how do you play Tetris against someone?
Like, if you clear blocks, you send junk to other people's screens, and you can kind of like choose who to send it to. And so then once somebody's screen fills up, they're out of the game. And so you're just trying to last the longest and clear out your blocks.
So you're all just playing Tetris.
Yeah, but
but
there is some
obstacles.
interaction. So yeah,
That's cool.
That's pretty interesting, and like it's such a unique battle royale because a lot of them are like shooters, but it's just like Tetris.
That's cool.
Which is really,
What-
I love it.
On what medium?
It's on the Switch, Nintendo Switch. Yeah, so I've just been doing a lot of
Sponsored
that.
by.
It's so like Tetris. I think I read an article about it a few years ago. How like there is some aspect of Tetris that like gives your brain some relaxation because of like the perfectness of fitting blocks into it. So it can be like a big relaxation thing, even if it's a stressful game. So that's been fun. And then, speaking of all the Netflix stuff here, an interesting thing is we've been reading this book for a couple of months because today's episode is on 100 Years of Solitude. Netflix just announced that they're going to have a series adaptation of this book.
So timely.
That was awesome. Just to get that.
I still don't understand how that's going to happen.
Oh, I know. And we'll get into all of that in our discussions
I'm
of
already
the book.
overwhelmed.
But I think that's cool. Like, good stuff that we're getting a jump start on that, and we don't have to be like, yeah, I want to read that before it comes out. Like, we're already halfway done, so we better do it then. So with all of that being said, we're gonna dive right into our discussion this week of 100 Years of Solitude. And so I've led a discussion now, Jamie has led a discussion now, and for today's episode we are passing it on over to Danny.
Hey. I'll start with a summary.
Good luck on that.
Yeah.
Also.
No. Also, I will note that we're 200 pages into this book. So many things have happened. I honestly don't know how 200 more pages of stuff is going to happen.
Yes. We have the family tree. So a lot of these, just so everybody is aware, like our editions kind of, the pages synced up as far as page number. So we are about a little past 200, isn't it like 201 or something?
203 for me.
So on the family tree, we're already like more than 3/4 of the way down. So
right. So the whole rest of basically there's like 3 generations listed. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 generations listed. 5. Right? 1.
A lot of summaries say
2,
7 total.
3. It's too many. There's a lot.
6.
How do
you read a family tree?
I don't know.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, so there's 6 generations on the family tree, and we're 2/3 of the way down, and so much has happened already. The book is written in such a way that I feel like it could just end now, and I would be like, all right, that was a profile of this family.
Yeah, a lot has been going down.
So the book is a profile kind of both the history of a fictional town in South America called Macondo, and it's also a profile of the founders of the town, the Buendia family. The patriarch of the family is Jose Arcadio Buendia, and his wife and I believe first cousin,
Yes.
is Ursula Iguaran, and this will come back a million times, but they're cousins, and she is afraid of marrying him because she's afraid that her kids will be born with pig's tails.
Yep.
And that comes back a lot, surprisingly often in this book. And so it's just a profile. It doesn't really follow a regular timeline. It doesn't really follow any kind of chronology. It just goes back and forth between there's a civil war that happens, and then there's the founding of the town, which is how the book kind of starts, and then it just goes back and forth. And so for me, it was hard to keep track of things. I would have safely assumed that a lot of people find it a little bit hard to keep track of things, just because it jumps around so often. And then another confusing element is that basically the author gives everybody in the book one of like the following names. For the men, it's Jose Arcadio or Aureliano, and for the women, it's Ursula, Amaranta, or Remedios. There are a few others, but basically a lot of the characters have those names.
Some variation on.
There's variation. There's some people have only Jose Arcadio. Some people have only Arcadio. Mm-hmm. And so that's very obviously intentional. And that just adds an element of confusion, but also it adds an element kind of it contributes to like kind of the murkiness of the whole, like you're not sure when it takes place. Sometimes you don't know right away which character he's talking about, because a lot of the characters who share names also share character traits. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's really hard to tell who he's talking about and what the timing is. So essentially, Jose Arcadio Buendia, the patriarch, is kind of he's interested in science. He's interested in like innovating, and he's really curious and just kind of wants to experiment. He kind of just follows one scientific quest after another, but his wife Ursula is much more practical and kind of just like she kind of just reins him in the whole time, and is trying to get him to kind of, I don't know, she reminds me of like maybe someone who would like you snap in like the face of a dog to get him to focus. That's kind of how she kind of is just like,
everybody.
Hey, focus. To everybody.
Yeah.
And so Jose Arcadio Buendia and Ursula have 3 kids, Aureliano Buendia, Jose Arcadio, and Amaranta. I'm gonna not verbalize the whole family tree.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
So I'm gonna stop there on the family tree. Let me just take out my notes. Hold on. The first question, the first thing that I want to discuss is the usage of so many of the same names, and also like the personality traits that they carry. It wasn't immediately obvious to me that a lot of the characters with the same names share personality traits, and I read about that when I was doing a little research, and I just wondered if to both of you, if that was something that stuck out immediately. For me, it was hard for me to even trace who we were talking about at times. But supposedly the Jose Arcadios are strong, and then the Aurelianos are more like pensive and introspective. So yeah, I wondered if that was apparent to either of you.
I would say at the beginning it wasn't, especially because it was hard to get a sense of that, obviously, at the beginning because of a lot of the jumps, and you kind of knew of the existence of some of these characters, but it wasn't always fleshed out because it was kind of just like in passing, and this kid's going to get born to
this person
father.
in like 20 years is
gonna... and then it kind of goes back to whatever the present currently is, and so it didn't really stick out too much, but I did really enjoy one of the later chapters in my edition, and maybe a lot of editions. I don't know how many are that synced up with the page numbers, but page 181 for me, I liked that Ursula kind of acknowledged it, and through, it kind of felt like a meta discussion of like, here's why this is kind of going down, and kind of like really spelling it out. But it's Ursula, on the other hand, when they're talking about a new child getting born named Jose Arcadio, Ursula, on the other hand, could not conceal a vague feeling of doubt throughout the long history of the family. The insistent repetition of names had made her draw some conclusions that seemed to be certain. And then it goes on and says, while the Aurelianos were withdrawn but with lucid minds, the Jose Arcadios were impulsive and enterprising, but they were marked with a tragic sign. And so I liked that it did kind of spell that out, and it kind of helped create some order to the chaos of the family tree, even though this chapter starts going into later versions of these children that are twins, which would be Jose Arcadio Segundo and Aureliano Segundo, that they kind of had those traits mix and match. It still does semi-hold true, but I liked that was the case. But no, I don't think that it was that clear at the beginning, but it did help make more sense of why the family tree is built in the way that it is, and centering it on, the hereditary nature of the story, just because it does focus on the Buendia family so much, just to see how those traits are passed down, and how, a lot of times it'll be like such and such, their kid has, this trait. The fact that it's tied to the names was really cool to me. So
I was going to bring up a similar point, and I don't know if it's before or after. I want to say it's before.
Yeah, let's clarify this, because this is the first time that this has happened, that somebody has read a book that we're looking at before. Yeah, we should clarify that.
I was going to talk about that. This point wasn't related to that. It's in this section.
But it's worth to
But
point
yeah,
out.
no. So I think I mentioned this in the last episode, but I have already read 100 Years of Solitude, and I'm rereading it for the podcast for these episodes. An addendum to that is I read 100 Years of Solitude for a class that I took in college. It was my senior year, fall semester of college. And the class was focused on post-colonial literature. I would love to say that background gives me some kind of like greater understanding of this novel. But in all honesty, that was a semester class where we read 100 Years of Solitude, Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, which is about the same length and about just as complicated, White Sargasso Sea, Jane Eyre, and a theory book on post-colonial writing. I think that's it. There might have been something else in there, but it was a lot of reading for a semester of class. Like it's not that many books for an English class in college, but like they were all pretty long, other than Wide Sargasso Sea, which is really short. But we had to read that with Jane Eyre because they're related. So in all of that, I read 100 Years of Solitude. I didn't write a paper over it because we got to choose which books of those we wanted to write about, and I didn't feel like I understood this one as well as some of the others.
Which is fair after getting through.
So like I didn't feel comfortable trying to find like evidence in this novel when there's so much going on. So I can't say that I have a great perspective.
That's fair, but it's just worth to have the backdrop before
I
getting
will
into
say,
any of the discussions on it.
I think that I go into it this second reading with a different point of view maybe than like a casual reader, because I read it under the guise of like post-colonial theory. So there's a lot of that, like what he's commenting on, that we had discussions about and lectures, and so like I feel like maybe I have a different view of it. Anyways, all of that to say,
sorry for the names.
I definitely didn't acknowledge that there was some connection the first time I read it. But in this section, when I was rereading, there was a section where Ursula, again, like, in a metacognitive way, acknowledged the thread of the names, and I can't remember if it's before or after that point. I want to say it's before it. But she says that she won't allow any more children to be named Jose, Arcadio, or Orleano.
Yeah, I do recall. Yeah.
Because she feels like they're like cursed, and then
because she has a big lamentation about all of the male family members, because she's just like they all end up
they like die
sucking.
Or they hate her or they do something bad, whatever. So then another son comes along, and the mom or dad or whoever is like, I'm gonna name him blah blah, and she's like, well, I guess so, but I'm gonna raise him. Yeah, as if that hasn't caused issues before.
Yeah. You've raised all of them.
Yeah, like literally you did this. No, I'm not woman blaming, but also in relation to that, the one piece of evidence from that class that I took in college that I do have on my computer, again, I didn't write a paper about this book, but I compared a different book to this book in one sentence, and this is what I said. It's citing evidence from like an article that I read, but it says, I'm talking about Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz in this paper, and I say the interwoven multi-generational narrative of Diaz's novel is undoubtedly reminiscent of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's classic 100 Years of Solitude. With successive generations, each ignorant of the history of its ancestors, seemed doomed to relive the violence and evil wrought by the family's curse. So I think that like that is definitely a theme throughout it. I can't say that I acknowledged that the first time, but that's all that. Anyways.
No, yeah, I think it's the name thing really is like I expect it to be as prevalent throughout the rest of the book as it is now. And I also remember there was one point where one of the sons had a daughter, I think, and said he wanted to name her after her grandmother, and then they all say, oh no, that must have been I think then he dies, and then they all say, oh no, that was a mistake, it couldn't have been, he couldn't have wanted to name her, I think it was Ursula.
Yeah, well, the beautiful moment about that part, and I don't have the page number on me, but he says it's because it's Arcadio, like in front of the firing squad, I'm pretty sure, is like, oh, name the daughter Ursula, and then it has like his thoughts a few minutes later. He's like, oh wait, I should have told them Remedios.
Yeah.
Because why would I do that?
Why would I want? Yeah.
And then the next few pages, the whole
Yeah,
family
they're
is
all
like,
like-
we'll name her Remedios.
Yeah, they're like, I don't know.
Surely
Surely he
he
didn't
didn't mean.
name her Ursula, which is just like a huge like screw you to the matriarch of the family.
Yeah. Also,
I still love that,
Ursula
though. It's
is like
funny.
the only one who's trying to keep shit together.
So that's great. This brings me to my next question. This was really interesting. So I think probably because he's presented as the patriarch and also he's so present. I was kind of surrounding the first half of the story around Jose Arcadio Buendia. And then I was doing some research and I came across one of those like it's kind of like a character map where they connect everybody in circles.
Yeah.
And then they like the bigger your influence and the more people that you're connected to, the bigger your circle.
Yes.
So
That's
I
cool.
was like so interested in this because I was like, oh, like obviously in the middle is going to be our Jose Arcadio, and it was Ursula was in the very middle, and I was like, oh, after that I was like, I totally saw how she actually is like, she's like intricately woven into everybody. And Jose Arcadio eventually is just like tied to a tree speaking Latin,
Yeah.
like literally.
Yeah, because she's just around though. Because even where we're leading off here, because I was talking about how far along we are on the family tree, and Ursula's still there, and it does specifically mention in one of the last couple chapters that she's now 100.
She said,
Or
she
over
says,
100.
She says she's so old and she's done so much in her life that she forgets how old she is. She doesn't even know how old she is.
Yeah.
I mean, it says she's around 100, but she doesn't remember how old she
Yeah,
is.
and so that does make sense about her influence because by this point, spoiler alert if anybody hasn't gotten this far, but Jose Arcadio Buendia dies, and she's still there, and more children have been born, and obviously, as we've mentioned, she is still choosing to take care of them, even though at this point, I think it was saying that she's practically blind or completely blind at this
cataracts, like
point
she
in
can't-
time. So
She just wants her influence.
Yeah, she's still there, and she's still influencing the kids.
So that was interesting. I wanted to ask, like, I think this is super subjective. If you guys had to pick, maybe this is two different questions. If you guys had to pick a main character, who would you pick? And along with that, who's the hero in the first half?
I have an opinion about main character,
Go.
at least at this point in the novel. And again, this is not tainted by the fact that I've read it before because I don't remember what happens.
Good.
But
Clearing that up.
I think that my argument at this point would be Orellano Buendia, Colonel Orellano Buendia as the main character, because the first sentence, which also is one of my favorite first sentences ever in literature,
Read it.
says, many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Orellano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. Like, oh, it's so beautiful. It's so good.
That's on our first sentences mug.
It is.
We have
a
famous
mug,
first sentences of literature, and
famous
that's on
first
there.
sentences. But it's so good. It's such a weird sentence. It's so perfect. But I think starting off with him,
Very
and then
jarring.
also the fact that, like, constantly throughout the novel, that same phrase is basically repeated. Like, it always says years later, when he faced the firing squad, he thought about this other thing. Like, it's like he literally thought about his entire goddamn life while he's in front of the firing squad. So it's mentioned all the time.
Yeah.
Which I think that thread throughout makes him a main character or the main character. But I also think that Ursula is such like a force in the novel that she could be a contender.
I wouldn't say that she, in my opinion, would be the main character just because she does play the supporting role, because a lot of hers is just like, kind of shaping the events around other people in her family. Because a lot of hers is reactions to other people. As we've mentioned, that a lot of her motives happen when somebody else is born and she wants to step in, rather than with a lot of the other male characters of the novel who go and do things regardless of how good or bad those things are. They're all doing things semi-independently, and she has moments of that too, but a lot of it is in reaction to others. But I agree that she still is like a huge force in that way. But
But I think that you could also argue that that kind of makes her a main character. Like,
Yeah.
we're almost viewing the things through her. Like, because we see her react to all of them. And
Yeah,
so,
that's
like,
true. I think her reaction, I think more than a lot of other people, we see her react to a lot of things that happen to her
Which
kids
is almost
and
like,
her daughters and her sons. And
like the narrator of a novel.
Yeah.
Like, you are getting her thoughts on everything throughout it.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though she's not the narrator. She's definitely, there's no.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I will say, as far as main character, I agree with Colonel Arliana Buendia because of the reasons that you mentioned. And there's been discussions I've had in, academic settings and with other people about the importance of first lines of literature and how, what's the word I'm looking for? How intentional a lot of the first lines in literature are, because you know that that's what everyone's going to read automatically.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot put into that first sentence. And like you said, he is the first one mentioned, and he does come back over and over. And with all the other characters, as much as Ursula pops in and out, so does he. Not only with his physical presence, but with the aura, with the legend of Arliana Buendia, because a lot of the stuff we find out might not even be true, but he's still present in some sort of way.
Yeah, I also think it's important to note with him, another reason that he would maybe be important, or maybe argue him as the main character. The majority of this book, the book, is revolved around the founding of this town, Macondo, and Orleano is the first one to be born in Macondo.
Yes.
So, like, he's born with the town, and we're kind of following both of their trajectories.
I will say this, though, to your second point, Danny, with the question of who's the hero.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know that I would consider him the hero, though.
Yeah.
Regardless of his standing as a main character, like, you bring that up and you get to thinking about a lot of the people in this family, and this is always a thing within novels. I assume that everybody that gets brought in is generally going to be, the protagonist or a good person. I don't think that that's the case for most of the family, which was a surprising thing to continue to go along and see that there were moments of innocence, and there was a lot of great stuff that many members of this family have done for their town and for the surrounding area, for the world in some cases, because some of them have been traveling around. There's still a lot that kind of makes you do a double take on their character, and you're like, wait a second, maybe their intentions aren't always as pure, with maybe some exceptions, but I haven't read along far enough to know, because they do bring it up with, like, Remedios, the beauty, how she does have some purity, but with some other detractions to that. But there's more to read. So I don't know that I would consider him the hero, but yes, maybe the main character.
Yeah, I don't know that there is a hero.
I was just gonna say that. I don't know that there is a hero. I thought that was it popped up on a list of essay questions that I found, and I thought that was really interesting because, if you wanted to, like, pick one and try to argue, you maybe could, but I don't. Nobody sticks out as having heroic characteristics, and I don't really think that's the point. Like, it's more of, like I said, like a profile. It makes me think of like a house with a bunch of windows, and every once in a while you're turning on a light in each room, and, like, you're just looking into each room of the house on, like, what's happening in that character in a particular moment,
and sometimes quite literally
and
within their house,
on an aunt and her nephew in a room. Spoiler.
We won't say what's going on in that room,
but yeah, I don't really think that there's a like, I don't think that having a hero is the point. It's more just kind of like a telling of, like, this of this town. I think maybe, I don't know, Jose Arcadio Buendia founded the town, but I don't think that makes him heroic.
Well, even the circumstances around him needing to do that in the first place. He straight up killed somebody.
Right, he killed someone and was
and
like, I'm out of here.
He's like, I gotta go.
I gotta go.
This ghost is bothering me.
So he killed somebody because he was being made fun of. He was being mocked by like people because his wife wouldn't sleep with him because she was afraid that their kids would have pig's tails.
Yeah.
And so his toxic masculinity ruins the party again. So he's threatened.
That's the name of the episode.
We've found it.
Summary of the book.
And I mean, honestly, I wrote masculinity as threatened many times.
Yeah, I think I did. I wrote toxic masculinity right next to, he said.
Is that a question mark though?
There's no question mark.
Toxic masculinity.
He said, but there will be no more killings in this town because of you.
Yeah.
Which, like,
So sorry.
he's literally just like, I killed that man because you won't fucking sleep
Because
with me.
you won't sleep with me.
It's your fault.
Oh, so that's there.
That is there.
I'm trying to think about. I don't think I have anything else about heroes or main characters. I will agree with you about Colonel Aureliano Buendia being probably the main character that makes the most sense. I think for the first like quarter of the book, I would have said it was Jose Arcadio Buendia.
Yeah.
Because he's the one who kills the person, founds the town, and he's it focuses a lot on him constantly like exploring and innovating and like inventing stuff and kind of just like being weird. I also found it really, this is a random aside, but I found it really humorous that they thought that he was going crazy and had some sort of like mental health issues, and then later a priest comes in and is like, no, he's just speaking Latin. Like, he's not crazy. He's not speaking in tongues. He's just speaking Latin.
It's a real language.
That's just talking to himself.
He's just talking.
It's fine.
But an interesting thing about that, though, with some of the stuff that he is saying to nobody in particular, that idea gets brought up again. Who was it with? It was with one of the Aurelianos.
I think it's the Segundo.
Yeah.
Is it Jose Arcadio Segundo? Or I think it is because, right?
What's the question?
So, well, it just brings it up. It is one of the twins for sure.
Yeah.
That they're in the workshop and they give a direct tie in to them seeing ghosts, and specifically of
Melquiades,
and that they did tie it, if I recall correctly, back to Jose Arcadio Buendia.
Yeah, Ursula, I think it's Ursula comes in and he's talking to the ghost of Melquiades.
Right, okay.
And she's like, who were you talking to? What were you saying? And he was like, oh, no one, like brushing it off, not wanting to tell her. And then she goes on this rant of like, oh, your grandfather, great-grandfather used to talk to himself too.
Mm-hmm.
Like he used to do that in his workshop all the time.
So that's interesting, just tying it into that, just now that was brought up. I just thought that, in looking at his character, that was an interesting trait later on. But
I think that carries through the maybe, I don't know, the cycle of his grandson or his great-grandson talking to a ghost we know about, but like, Jose Arcadio Buendia could have been speaking Latin to a ghost we don't know about, or like, someone, and like that just makes it feel very cyclical to me. Like we don't know where the ghost started, if Jose was first or if the ghost was
talk
first.
to the ghost.
He does
of the guy he killed.
Right.
Yeah.
Prudencio.
Mm-hmm.
He talks to Prudencio Aguilera, and he keeps being like, dude, like, just go, I'm sorry. Like, just be in peace now.
My wife made me kill you.
It's Ursula's fault.
it wasn't you.
It wasn't.
It was her.
It was her. It was not me, though. I'll tell you that. I did not.
It's not my fault.
All right. I have one. Maybe not last, but I have one more question, kind of related to the theme of like the town. I kept reading a lot. I'm sure you guys came across this too. I kept reading a lot about how this is an allegory for like Adam and Eve and the fall and like in the Bible. And I wondered if, I don't know, I felt kind of like I would be remiss if we didn't talk about all of the parallels that you can draw. And I wondered which ones stuck out to you. I was curious. I have a few that I jotted down, but I wondered if you guys had any parallels to draw between sort of like the Garden of Eden story and Macondo.
Well, the first one off the bat, and I might have missed that conversation about the tie-in there, but I think one of the ones that does stand out that maybe isn't directly a tie, but the same general idea is there's the aspect of punishment for forbidden acts. Because that, as you mentioned from the beginning, Ursula brings up with a lot of it is with, incestual relationships and the pigtails. And there are, I believe, some other instances of that as well. But when somebody is doing something that is against the grain or against what society sees as normal or anything else, that idea is brought up that there's going to be some punishment in some way. And I think that's huge for a lot of it, because I think that there maybe could be some reason as to why there are problems with the family down the line because of that relationship. Obviously, it was on Ursula's mind that, her and Jose Arcadio Buendia are related, and then that could be a trickle-down effect from there, from this forbidden, quote-unquote, forbidden relationship, however you view it, that that did cause problems for generations and generations to come. So that one was always really interesting because, again, the pigtails idea comes back over and over because a lot of the family continues to fall into these forbidden actions moving forward.
Yeah, I have kind of a tie.
Go for it.
Maybe.
I have. You want me to list mine first?
Go for it.
So I found this was both mine and also like a kind of just like a generic list I found when I was doing a little bit of research. But the first one that they draw is between Jose Arcadio Buendia and both Adam and Eve and their thirst and search for knowledge. Like he just generally is searching for knowledge, and then not directly tied, but they're eventually banished from the Garden of Eden and have to go elsewhere because they, find the knowledge. And then also the Tree of Knowledge, there's a tie there into him being tied to a tree. He goes insane and eventually they just literally tie him to a tree. I thought that was temporary. And then he just is there for a long time.
Here's a question that I have, because I had a note about this in my book from when I read this the first time. And I couldn't remember what it was talking about. But I specifically, when he goes out to the tree, it's a chestnut tree, I think, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
And specifically for multiple pages, every single time it was mentioned, I circled the word chestnut. And I think maybe it's a biblical reference that's why I circled it, but I didn't know if anybody else knew.
I don't know. I want to bookmark that for next time because I don't know. I'm sure it matters, but I don't know if it's a biblical reference.
I know I circled it for a reason.
Yeah.
But I don't remember because I didn't really write a note. It was just like chestnut, chestnut.
Well, and also they say it a lot, so it clearly matters.
Yeah.
I mean, he wouldn't say it over and over.
I just don't know the Bible well enough to know if that's like a thing.
I only know about mustard seeds.
Okay.
It's
not a mustard seed.
It's not
tree.
a mustard tree.
I mean, it could be just the tie of a tree that bears something.
Yeah.
And it could be as simple as that, but maybe there is more to it. But
no, we'll have to look into that.
But in you mentioning that, there have been other discussions about those ties that, something as simple as that can't necessarily be overlooked. Like, even if it is as simple as that, it's just tying it to without being so heavy-handed about it.
The thing that I was going to talk about is kind of related. I don't know. Because when I read this the first time, like I said, it was under the guise of, not guise, it was under the influence of a post-colonial theory literature course, which this very much is like a staple of post-colonialism. I am in no way saying that you shouldn't always read this book that way, but that is the background knowledge that I have. So I feel like I looked at it less in a biblical way. Like there's references, and I'm sure we talked about them in class, but something that I think is related because of religious imagery, but maybe you guys can help me think about it, but also I just want to talk about this, is the insomnia plague.
Oh, yeah, go. Do it.
I want to talk about the insomnia plague.
So, yeah, summarize it and then talk about it. Because this was a really interesting part for me, too.
Yeah, so it's in chapter 3, and it's one of my favorite parts of this book. It is the part that, like, stuck out in my brain after I read this. I remembered this very vividly, even being years later. But essentially, in the town of Macondo, there's lots of stuff going on. Jose Ocardio Buendia is really interested in the gypsies that come to town because they bring new inventions. And then also there's like other people circling in and out because they've got this cool new stuff in the town.
But the gypsies brought ice.
The gypsies brought ice. They discovered it. And one day, this is related, but one day a girl called Rebecca shows up, and she's kind of adopted by the family. And her
weird ass homeless girl.
Yeah, her background is like not immediately understood, but she's like some orphan. I think they say maybe she's an Indian orphan.
Yeah, I think
what they call her.
think that they call her an Indian orphan.
And she's weird, and she eats mud and like
and
drywall.
whitewash.
Yeah,
Whitewash. Is that what that is?
that's what. Yeah,
I don't know.
But she's really weird and eats stuff, and then she gets sick. She's the first one that gets sick as far as I'm aware. And they call it the insomnia plague, but it came through like a loss of memory. They couldn't sleep and would start losing memories from their childhood and from other things, and it keeps getting worse and worse. At first, like Jose Ocardio Buendia laughs at it and is like, whatever, superstition, it's the Indians, blah. But then it keeps getting worse and worse, and basically the whole town becomes affected by this to the point where they have to write themselves notes all over the town to remind them why things are important.
It was the most chilling to read that sentence when it says they did not become alarmed until the third day when no one felt sleepy at bedtime, and they realized that they had gone more than 50 hours without sleeping. And I was like, oh, God.
Like, oh, no.
Guys, hold on a second.
Hold on a second.
It's been a bit, hasn't it?
The part that always gets me is on page 47. And this is the thing that stuck in my brain for so long is they're talking about like how bad it's getting, and they're writing all these notes, and they say, thus they went on living in a reality that was slipping away. And a few lines after that say that at the beginning of the road into the swamp, they put up a sign that said Macondo, and another larger one on the main street that said God exists. And just like that is such a, like they're trying to remind themselves that that is a thing they believe, but also they get to a point where they don't know what that means, which is fascinating to me. And when I read this in my class, we talked a lot about how this whole chapter essentially is just an allegory for the ideas of colonialism, because they are this small little town with their own traditions and their own ideals, and suddenly people start coming in because there's stuff to see there, like Indians and gypsies and all these different things. Strangers keep coming into town, and they have to ring a bell to say that they're a stranger. And I just remember we talked a lot about how, like, the insomnia sickness is a metaphor for how cultures start to lose things when strangers come in. Like, they start to forget what their original life was like because they're discovering new things. And there's a lot of layers to that. But I think that could be related also to the Adam and Eve idea of, like, an outside party comes in and tells you, hey, you could do this.
Right.
What about this?
And then it gets so bad that they literally have to write it down to remind themselves that God exists. And it's like, maybe you can adapt and maybe it's okay. Maybe you shouldn't have to write it down and remind yourself if you can't actually remember it on your own.
Yeah. Because there's also, like, I think a page before that, it says, there was so much to do in Macondo in those days that there was barely enough time. So like there's so much going on because all these different people are coming in and bringing new things and discovering new things from different lands that suddenly they're like, we got all this stuff to do, and oh shit, what did we do before?
Yeah, and like what do we do? What do we believe?
What are our ideals? Like what do we I love that. Anyways. That's my thought.
Well, even looking at it with both ways, because it could be like, oh, well, maybe it is okay to adapt on one side of things. You know, there is also still the side of it that's looking at, hey, this might have been ruined. Like it would have been perfect if we were talking about like an Adam and Eve situation where outside influences were brought in and literally they were taken from a promised eternal paradise and had, you know, problems thereafter. Like that's a similar idea there, that it was problematic and maybe not as much of a commentary of like, well, if you can't remember it, it's not too bad, you can adapt to it. Like it can be read both ways, but like it is, you know, something to think about, the intention of that too, because in a lot of ways when we first hear about Macondo, it's in a very picturesque way, and a lot of their established ways seem fine at the beginning, because even with the kids before they grew into adults, you know, they were discovering ice, and you know, the worst thing that happened was Jose Arcadio Buendia was too curious, and then things start to kind of rapidly spiral out of control from there. But I did love that part because it does stick out in your mind, and obviously there are layers to it. But that is one of the things that was really engrossing, because it seemed that it didn't jump around as much because there was a lot of focus on that event at that time, as opposed to time jumping. It seemed like it stayed in one place for a while.
Yeah, I think that's one of the events in the book that like is focused on without jumping around for like the longest. So I mean, it definitely like kept my attention, and I mean, just them having to like label things. I just was imagining like a whole town like walking around sticking index cards on cows, labeled cow,
and writing on their whole house,
and like and writing and having to label everything because they were so afraid. That was a super interesting, super engaging part for me.
I mean, I think that there is a lot there. There is a lot more to read as well, so it might be a good time for some final thoughts, just to see where, you know, we're curious about where the book's going to go, what the thoughts were currently, if anybody wants to start with that, just because obviously there's like so much more for us to discover moving forward, because this book has this all happened in one half of a book. Like we're talking about something that sounds like it's,
and we didn't get to a lot.
And we didn't get to a lot of it.
There were like 35 other things that I had.
But yeah, just curious on like thoughts so far and thoughts moving forward, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess I'm so curious where it's going to go and what else. We have 200 pages left or more. And I want to know if there's more of a focus on one event. That there was a civil war that happened in this whole first half that we didn't even talk about.
Yeah.
That made its way through, but was still not a centerpiece. And I wonder if there's something in the second half that is an event that, you know, brings everything together or focuses everything on. We talked earlier about how in a non-Game of Thrones-esque fashion, there are a lot of characters, but like nobody really has died. Some people have died, but then also some of them come back even after they die, or they haven't really died. So there's a lot to keep track of, and I'm curious if we're going to keep adding or if people are going to kind of fall by the wayside.
Yeah, I think for me, what I think will be interesting moving forward is the fact that there is so much time jumping, which is something that I personally love. Like there's a lot of stories that have a non-linear timeline. There's actually a video on this channel about that from maybe a year and a half ago that I talked about some notable books that I liked with non-linear timelines. Slaughterhouse-Five was one of the notable examples there. But the fact that we've already heard about some events that we haven't technically read yet, and you know, what's going to be the culmination of the story, and have we heard it already? Because when I first started the book, we talked about that incredible first sentence. I thought the book was going to end with the firing squad, but we already saw it. That's the thing, is we already saw that, and there were other events that have been brought up. There are still a couple more generations that need to really come into their own in this story. But I think the main thing that's going to drive me forward is seeing how it is going to end and how it ties to what we've heard before, because, there's kind of times where authors can write themselves into corners when they reveal too much, and it seems that it has to move in a certain direction where it could be cliche or it's not wrapped up in a satisfactory way. But if done correctly, stories like this can really be a home run at the end, depending on how the nonlinear timelines are handled. So that's what I'm going to be curious about, and what I'm excited to move forward with after seeing that the firing squad is just by the wayside at this point. So that'll be cool to read moving forward.
I don't know. I don't have a lot of final thoughts. I'm excited to finish reading it again. I think that with the announcement of the Netflix special, I'm especially interested in refreshing.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, I just don't even know.
When did they say?
I don't know how. I think it was
next year.
Next year, yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be a while.
We'll do a follow-up.
But yeah. I don't know how they're going to incorporate all of the detail here, unless I feel like the only way that I could see doing it is literally 40 pages of this is one season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't
even. Yeah.
It's so there's so much.
Do they do it
happens.
by generation, or do they do it
That
by
would be
event, or there are 100 million ways that they could do this, and
or do they literally just do snapshots?
it's gonna need to be a split screen of a family tree just there the whole time.
Oh, yeah, so you
just
understand.
a quick pause, they bring it out just for your reference.
You made me laugh so hard.
Here's this.
A week ago we were texting about this, and Brian said I think we'd read maybe 150 pages, and Brian was like, I think I've checked the family tree more times than number of pages that I've read. And that just rang very true.
It was, it seemed like an over-exaggeration. It was not. It was not.
I also, just side note, before we leave without saying this, I had forgotten about, I knew going into this, I'm like, oh, guys, there's lots of characters that have the same names. I forgot about the part on the family tree where it literally just says 17 Orleanos.
Yep.
There were 17 of them here at one point.
At one point. From one guy also.
Colonel, when Aureliano...
That's not including the ones that have Colonel Orleano, Buendia. No, this is just 17 Orleanos.
He just sowed his wild oats while he was in the army and had 17 and just named them all Aureliano.
And we do know details about them, though. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's not I don't know.
One of my favorite parts, I know we're almost done, but I remember, I forgot to bring this up. This was almost like a, what is it called? Breaking the fourth wall. It sounded like the author talking to us directly when at one point someone is born and they decide to name them, and I think it's Ursula who says, they decided to name him only Jose Arcadio in order to avoid any confusion. And I was just like, what the fuck? I was like, is this the only instance you're concerned about that? Because there are a lot of other instances.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll also say, just for the 17 Orleanos thing, because technically we've been there, right when we learned that there's 17 of them, it also continues further on that they all die.
Yeah, it's immediately there's 17 of them. They all died before we talk about them really at all. But
it's okay, sounds good.
Just for further confusion.
Yeah, I don't know. It'll definitely be interesting, and while the book has been confusing, it's been enjoyable, and I just it's so unconventional that it's hard to predict where it will go. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thanks,
work,
Danny,
guys.
for part 1 of your discussion. I think we did discuss for our next book, because we've been talking about what books we're doing next. I think the next one after this, we're going to bring a 4th person into the fold, and I'm just putting it on recording now to make sure that this actually happens. But we're going to be
Holding
doing,
him accountable.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing a Kurt Vonnegut book, and we'll probably be back next week with what that book's actually going to be. But that was the contract that we signed.
Yeah.
Is that it has to be a Kurt Vonnegut novel, and then the contract among the rest of us that it has to be one that none of us have read. So
Yes.
so that's going to be upcoming in the future, and then after that we'll have another segment of one book each for all of us, and that'll be a total of 7. Then we'll just kind of see where it goes from there. But that's the plan moving forward. That's what we're going to be doing. So we'll be back whenever the next episode is. What's the next holiday, guys? Easter?
We'll do We'll do a part 2 on Easter.
We're going to do it.
Hopefully it's not that late.
Yeah, and
Hopefully we do
Easter
that before.
episode. But yeah, we will be back with part 2. And yeah, thanks for joining Beer Time with Books.
Bye. Beep-a-doo-bow.
It's back.
Bum, 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 bum.